This is the brand new Hasselblad 90mm f2.5 and it's $4,300.
Why could it possibly cost $4,300 for a prime lens that isn't that fast?
There's a few really special features like a leaf shutter, but also it produces really beautiful results. So we're going to show you what you get for that $4,300 and you can decide if it's for you. But first we want to take a moment to ask you to like and subscribe to this channel. If you like reviews like these, it helps support us and it helps us make more tutorials just like this one.
We create unbiased reviews. We've never been sponsored by a camera or lens manufacturer, but we are sponsored by Adorama. Adorama is the place to buy your camera gear. Start at this link. That just lets them know that you heard about them through us. It helps to keep us making more videos. We love Adorama because they have customer support who can help you choose the right gear. They can help you get the most bang for your buck, whether you have the budget for a $4,300 lens or if you're looking for something more in the 3 digits. Adorama has everything for creators. Thanks for sponsoring us, Adorama.
All right, let's get into the nitty-gritty. So you're probably wondering, who spends $4,300 on a lens?
Oh, well, the body is $8,500, so you're looking at like $13K for this particular setup.
Yeah, we're typically doing reviews where people are price shopping and trying to find the best value, but the person in the market for this lens is not looking for that. They're looking for legacy and a luxury experience and having different features that set them apart from the average consumer. It's not unlike a luxury car.
Right, if you buy yourself a Rolls Royce, it's not the only car in your garage. And if you buy this, it's probably not gonna be the only camera that you have. You will probably have a general purpose camera and lens, an A7 or a Canon R5 or something, and then you'll get this because I believe this is the best portrait lens and camera setup in existence with 100 megapixels and the leaf shutter. It does things no other camera and lens can do, but it's also not general purpose. What we're looking at is something specialized and luxury.
So let's talk about what you get if you're lucky enough to be able to get this set up. And first of all, we'll cover the design of this lens because it is beautiful. One of the things you get when you buy Hasselblad is beautiful design. And you can see that in the little details here with these little H's that provide the texture on these rings. You have a ring that you can slide forward and then you can manually focus. And it's difficult to explain without you touching it, but it just feels solid and beautiful and well made.
The rear ring here is a control ring and I have it set to control the aperture, and it's difficult to explain, but the clicks are better than other clicks. And I could also turn the clicks off and it's nice and smooth. Little things like the lens hood snaps on in such a satisfying way. And it is the difference between a denim jacket and a fine luxury leather jacket, right? Like you feel it, but you can't necessarily explain it with words. This design is small and lightweight. Like, even though this is a medium format system, this lens is smaller than your typical full frame 85 f1.4.
And that's pretty counterintuitive because usually when you think medium format, you think large, but this is compact enough where you will be comfortable carrying it around.
This is a review of the lens, but not the camera, but the entire system kind of goes together. Like, this X2D has just the biggest, most beautiful viewfinder I've ever seen. It's better than real life. And because the sensor itself is 100 megapixels, it just gives you impossible amounts of detail. Like, even this prime lens allows for crazy amounts of croppability. And I can take a picture of these boats and then zoom way in and just see more detail than I could with like literally any other camera. Having a lens this sharp and 100 megapixel sensor means I can zoom in and read the text clearly on this sign. Those sorts of details are captured forever with this combination. To really find out how it compared for sharpness, we brought it into our lab, comparing it to the 60 megapixel full frame Sony a7R5 at 85 millimeters with the f1.4 GM lens. Zoom in. Right away, you notice the red, the sort of magenta that the Sony ends up producing when processing the fine lines. The Hasselblad is pretty much free from this, though we see just a little bit of moire. It's not nearly as bad. There's also much more fine detail in these individual lines, and numbers like the 800 here are far more readable. This is a resolution chart though, so you don't necessarily see that big of a difference in more real-world images. Still, the 100 megapixel Hasselblad is noticeably sharper, and this lens is built to keep up with that sharpness. And it's not related to the lens, but I also want to check the dynamic range by raising the exposure of both of these images. Here, the details hidden in the shadows definitely look much better
with the 100 megapixel Hasselblad image. A bigger sensor with a lower base ISO simply produces more dynamic range, even though these are both Sony sensors.
And I kind of wish the aperture ring here had f-stops marked on it, because I like the physical markings, but when I have it up to my eye, I can just move it so smoothly and see the aperture at the bottom, and that actually works really, really well. The autofocus on this is much improved. The camera itself has got a firmware update and now has face detect autofocus, which I find makes things easier. I still usually use single point autofocus, and with this lens, autofocus is good. It's snapping into focus. In low light conditions, it can struggle a little bit still, but the manual focus is really nice. Like when I pop this out to go into manual focus, it shows me a little different types of focus indicators, but the simplest one here just tells me which way to turn the focusing ring, and then it turns green when it snaps into focus. And I found that worked better than autofocus in low light conditions, and it was really reliable. Another benefit of the medium format system is the bigger sensor has more dynamic range than is possible on any full frame camera. The base ISO is 64, and it means in like backlit situations like this, I'll be able to recover the shadows and highlights more than even with your top end full frame cameras. And I don't know that it's going to be enough for this incredibly backlit situation, but I know I'm getting more dynamic range than I could with any other.
This is the noisiest place on earth. It's really noisy.
The nice thing about Hasselblad is when you are taking a picture, you know you couldn't possibly be capturing more detail, more dynamic range. This is the best you could possibly get out of the situation.
To my eyes, this boat was a complete silhouette. But look, if I lower the exposure here, you can see the massive dynamic range, even in the highlights, allows me to recover all the detail from the crests of these waves. I can also zoom into the boat and clearly recover so much detail in the shadows that I thought were just black.
And while I'm talking about the Hasselblad system, it has so many features the other cameras don't have. Like you can see this screen even in full sunlight. And Sony, Canon, Nikon, you cannot see any of their screens in sunlight. The user interface is so smooth and fast and intuitive. The screen is bigger and sharper, and look at the menu system. This is the entire menu system. There's not some 1,000-page manual you need to read. It's all intuitive like a smartphone would be. And it has a single card slot, CF Express Type B, but you don't need to use it because it has a terabyte of internal storage. That means you don't have to buy a separate memory card. This has been a great walking around lens for us, and I've been using it for days, just grabbing little detailed shots, close-up shots, street photography. But I think at its core, it is a portrait lens. So I want to get some portraits of Chels. And I know like it's like 25 degrees out here. You probably aren't feeling super attractive right now.
I feel gorgeous with my cold eyeballs.
But let's get a few shots. I also want to highlight the Hasselblad system now has face detect, and it works fantastic. You just turn it on, it locks onto your face. No, it doesn't compete with the A9 III's eye detect, but it works, and it makes it all much quicker and easier.
Check out the power I have while editing these photos. I can raise the exposure on Chelsea here to match the brightness of the background. And there's definitely some noise in the shadows, but I know I have more detail and better dynamic range than I would with any other camera. Check out that before and after.
This big screen on the X2D is also the first way your clients are going to see their photos, and it's bigger and brighter, and that looks better than the picture would look on a Sony, right?
Yeah, it looks beautiful.
And because the lens is f2.5, that's a full frame equivalent of f2. It's not going to give you more bokeh than you would get out of like one of Canon's 85 f1.2 lenses. If you want the ultimate background blur, you're still in a full frame system.
I don't think that's really the point though.
No.
Because you can still get beautiful bokeh, and of course you could add more in post-production. But I think where it really stands apart is with the leaf shutter and the really high sync speeds when you're using your strobe. And you can see from these other pictures that we took that you get a completely different look. And it looks super editorial. It has 100 megapixels. So you have to keep that in mind with the whole system, that you're just getting a different look.
Look, the A9 Mark III has gotten a huge amount of hype for having a global shutter and being able to sync up to 1/80,000th of a second. This syncs at 1/4000th of a second, but it has the same ability to overpower light as the Sony does at 1/25,600.
Yeah, and if you don't know what a global shutter is and you're wondering about the leaf shutter and everything, we have these videos that go into detail if you're into that highly technical, geeky stuff that we love.
But the results here just speak for themselves. The leaf shutter works. It blurs the background, I think, enough for most use cases. The autofocus system works well enough. And for me, this combo, this lens, this body is the ultimate portrait setup. And it's enough that like I'm gonna add it to my own collection. I'm not gonna do I'm switching to Hasselblad video because I'm not getting rid of everything else. But for portraits, especially with strobes, like this is what I'll pick up in the future.
Looks like I'm not retiring.
The leaf shutter has some benefits and also introduces a couple of quirks. Like it only has 5 shutter blades. So if I shut it down all the way to f32 and take a picture of the sun here, you can see the Starbursts only have 8 blades to them, whereas with a normal camera it might have like 20 or 25. It's still a cool effect.
Also notice the color splotches here, the green and magenta. This is the sunlight reflecting off the surface of the sensor. This happens with basically all the Sony sensors I've seen, including the Nikon and Sony cameras. I believe it's light reflecting off the phase detect autofocus sensors that are on the sensor itself.
I also found the bokeh could become a little weird. Like depending on how the leaf shutter synced with the lights, you could end up with bokeh that instead of being a ball looked more like a shuriken, like, you know, like one of those throwing stars that Bruce Lee, that's what I'm thinking, yeah, like Bruce Lee would like whip these out in one of those 70s karate movies. Like they kind of look like that, and that's because the light might not be syncing. I found that to happen with Christmas lights, because nowadays Christmas lights are like LEDs and they're actually flickering very quickly. So you do find a few little quirks like that, a few little things you need to know because it is working so different. The leaf shutter, it's in the lens. Like the sensor itself does not have a shutter that closes. That's called a focal plane shutter. That's what most cameras have. With the leaf shutter, the shutter is inside the lens, and that means that the lens determines the shutter speed. And that's part of why it costs so much, because Hasselblad has to build some expensive mechanical components in the lens that you don't need with a focal plane shutter. It gives you some unique traits. It gives you a unique look. It makes strobes that much more functional, but it adds a little bit to the cost. So Chelsea, we spent a couple of weeks shooting with the 90 f2.5 Hasselblad. Should people get it?
Absolutely. If you can get this, you should get it. It's incredible, it's fun, it's well built, it has legacy and history, and most importantly at all, it produces beautiful photos. But if you can't afford this, you should go to our sponsor, Adorama, and shop for other things within your budget. They have lenses, cameras, and all things you could possibly need to create images.
Yeah, and then just keep dreaming of this, because you need something to build to, right? I do think this is the ultimate lens for detailed street shots as well as portrait shots and a lot of like commercial and product photography. And yeah, I'm definitely going to add it to my own collection.
Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see more reviews like this. Thanks for watching. Bye.
Bye.